أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والله جعل لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا وجعلنا لكم من أزواجكم بنين وحفدة ورزقكم من الطيبات أفبالباطل يؤمنون وبنعمة الله هم يكفرون. صدق الله العظيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and Allah has made for you mates of your own nature, and made for you out of them sons and daughters and grandchildren, and provided for you sustenance of the best. Will they then believe in vain things and be ungrateful of Allah's favors? Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another edition of Islam for Europeans. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And as promised, I'm providing you my critical analysis of the recent debate organized by Patrick Bet-David, or PBD. Let's call him PBD in this video, which was a 2x2 debate between one side is the anti-Islam side, and that was Robert Spencer, who's a well-known Islamophobe de jour of like 30 years. We also have this Rachid guy who is an apostate from Islam to Christianity from Morocco. And then on the Islam side, we have brothers Daniel and brother Jake. Daniel, as you know, is the head of the Muslim Skeptic, and brother Jake, his site is called the Muslim Metaphysician. So I wanted to give a breakdown of the whole video. I've watched it twice, and I had a chance to watch PBD's interview with Eddie from the Dean Show later. So this was originally organized by PBD and Muhammad Hijab. He had to drop out, unfortunately, and Eddie from the Dean Show helped organize Daniel and Jake to come on. So, first and foremost, many Muslims are touting this as like a huge W. It's an intellectual WWE style slam dunk, blasting Robert and Rashid into another universe. They've been very, people have been very taken aback when you critique anything related to this video. I do think that Daniel and Jake, given the particular format that they had to do this in, I don't think they did anything particularly bad per se. I think that any Muslim in the same situation probably would have done the same. I question the entire format because here's the thing, the anti-Islam right, they come in with all these different attacks against Islam, and you can give like a laundry list, and with each of these controversial issues, the best way to respond to these is in a scholarly manner, giving a breakdown of the tafsir, or the explanation of the Quran, the time and place in which this event happened. So I'll give you some examples. So, for example, slavery in the Quran. That's a very huge, dense topic, and people have written books on the topic of slavery and Islam, right? And even to give like a Reader's Digest version, you would have to take at least a couple of minutes. Or the young age of Aisha requires another, usually a big explanation, right? So these are very sensitive topics, and I think it's important for Muslims to have a good grasp of these controversial issues, not just for giving dawah to non-Muslims, but also for their own faith, really. And when you don't understand these issues in full, that can lead to a lot of people questioning their own faith. So, I was on the Jolly Heretic, with Dr. Ed Dutton's podcast. If you don't know who Dr. Ed Dutton is, he's a evolutionary biologist, a researcher who has more favorable attitudes on Islam. And, that was a format where I was just doing a one-on-one interview with him via Zoom. And he had a super chat where people would, post their questions, and he would give me questions one by one, and give me at least a couple minutes to respond. But this type of debate format is just absolutely awful for that, because you're only given a couple minutes to respond. And Robert and Rashid on the anti-Islam side, at one point Rashid went on for 4 minutes talking about all of these controversial, like attacks against Islam that the anti-Islam right always uses. Slavery, uh, spousal abuse, war in the Quran. He didn't mention FGM. What else? Like taking Sophia as a wife after a certain battle. Um, all within like a minute. And Daniel was like, okay, let me address these issues one by one. Well, you don't have time to do that. Like it would take at least a 5 to 10 minute explanation for every one of these particular issues. You don't have time for that. And the other thing is that you're talking to two of the biggest Islamophobes ever. You know that even if you give a thorough explanation of each ayah, of each hadith, about the asbab al-nuzul, or like the reasons for the revelation, your time is up. They're moving on to the next topic. So what happened was, Robert and Rachid brought up all these issues, and by the end of the debate, most of them weren't even covered. So Jake and Daniel weren't even given a chance to respond. They were able to, around the 1 hour mark, respond to something about killing non-combatants during war, which is forbidden in Islam. But you can only do so much, and it's a lot easier to take the other strategy, which is what they did, which is to um, take a strategy of attacking back intellectually on Robert and Rachid, saying that they're not true Christians, that they don't represent Christianity. They asked them, "Do you represent Christianity or liberal secularism?" Which is a valid question, right? But then by the time you say that, half of your time is almost over, right? So you have barely enough time to answer all of these issues, and I can understand why Muslims would say, who cares? If non-Muslims watch this is not supposed to be Islam 101. You're debating one of the biggest Islamophobes. So why should we give a thorough explanation? All the information is already out there, which is a valid point. But at the same time, you have to remember, you're on the Patrick Bet David show. So the audience watching this is going to be comprised mainly of three groups. You're going to have the Muslims who are watching this show. I saw them on the chat. They're like, Allahu Akbar. They're giving Jake and Daniel their 100% support. You're gonna have the Robert and Rashid's crowd, the anti-Islam right. They're gonna go. They're gonna, it's like a big it's like the Jets and the Sharks coming together to fight each other in West Side Story. And then the third group is PBD's regular viewers, right? They subscribe to his channel, so of course they're going to watch this. So imagine someone with little to no information on Islam watching this entire debate, and Robert and Rashid talking about like Muhammad, peace be upon him, launching 83 wars, marrying Aisha at the age of 9, paying the jizya, and just basically attacking non-Muslims willy-nilly. Well, we know that these things have either completely false or have a far more a lot of nuance to it. But if you're a non-Muslim, at the end, since you're going to think to yourself, well, Jake and Daniel, instead of addressing these really hot topics and providing an explanation to their non-Muslim audience, they just said, well, Christians do it too, basically. So me, as a convert of 20 years, I would never show this video to any of my non-Muslim family members, or friends and family. It is not an introduction to Islam, and and even some of these topics, the ones that the hot topic, the main hot topic that they kind of misaddressed was the whole issue of apostasy in Islam. It is not an absolute in all cases. It's decided upon by an active Muslim government, and it's on a case-by-case basis. If you're a Muslim living in a non-Muslim land, you cannot take the law into your own hands. That's one thing. And then, yeah, but I mean, it's almost as if this is now set in stone, because this interview is now in the public domain, and even though I think there were good things that came out of it, I mean, PPD said that Jake and Daniel did a great job, and I admit they did a good job with what they had to work with. And I hope that this stirs more conversation, more deeper conversations about some of these topics, like slavery and Islam. But I think at the end of the day, what you're seeing is that we think that we've somehow like defeated, quote unquote, defeated Robert Spencer, when all you're doing, I mean, one of the things you're doing by having this podcast in the first place is giving him a platform. So people who hate, who don't have a negative opinion of Islam, now see this man, and he's advertising his book, and so is Rachid. He's probably going to get an uptick in book sales after this. And like we're talking like we had this some sort of fatality in Mortal Kombat, when really he's just going to go home, to his wife and kids. So that's my take on it from a perspective of looking at the whole Dawa scene. And I think even though some good things did come out of this whole interview, and you can't fault Jake and Daniel per se. And I've been in the same hot seat as them before in the Jolly Heretic, and it's very difficult. It's difficult to get all of your points across and say, oh, I should have said that there. Once you're in the hot seat, it's very difficult. But I'm trying to look at it from a more holistic perspective, because what was the goal of this whole interview? Was it to just basically blast Robert Spencer, or did we have a more overarching goal of just decreasing Islamophobia? Because if your main audience, I'm assuming, like on this PBD podcast, is going to be Robert and Rashid's followers, they are so incredibly stone-hearted and hard-headed that it's going to be almost impossible to change their minds. You have to look at it from a scale of minus 100 to plus 100. Minus 100 being like your total Islam hater, never going to change them, to plus 100, which is having a positive image of Islam, right? And with the whole idea, the way that Dawa is done in the West is it's heavily focused on the action phase, getting people to take their shahada, right? Which I understand the reasoning behind that, just because the reward of taking one shahada is so great, not just for the person converting to Islam, but also the person giving Dawa to them. That all these other, what happens before, that leads them up to that, and what happens afterwards in terms of maintenance, a lot of that just completely goes by the wayside. And I think there's an over focus on debating these anti-Islam figures, when look at the position of Muslims here right now. Look at the people who are really impressed with the Muslims are doing, with the recent protests. Who think that wow, the Muslims are not only like participating, but they're actually leading the charge. So there's a whole different bunch of groups that Muslims could give dawah to, where it's not this incredibly toxic environment, where you have people who are willing to incrementally move them up towards the pro-Islam side. That's some of the issues that I wanted to bring up. Other issues about the whole thing is that I guess one thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't know, maybe Jake wanted to bring this up as a talking point, but one of the arguments they said is that the reason why the West is falling, that like it's a slippery slope with liberalism and the different agendas are being pushed on us, is that because Christians aren't sticking to their religion. And I can understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, I think inherent in Christianity is the idea that I think Christianity itself led to liberalism, because if Jesus, peace be upon him, is going to forgive all of our sins, that his blood forgives all Christian sins, what's the point of doing any good deeds at all? What's the point of refraining from sinning? If Jesus is going to forgive all my sins, I can go out gambling and drinking, and I don't have to get married, and I don't have to have kids. Like I know that a good Christian wouldn't do those things, but this is when I was in Catholic school in the 90s, you could tell that there just wasn't any real fear of God. And in Islam, yes, like our salvation is in believing that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his final slave and messenger. But at the same time, there's consequences. We're called to account for our deeds, both good and bad. And I think Islam has more to offer in terms of that. But that's neither here nor there. I think also important to bring up, and this is a point that Rashid, I actually had to agree with him to an extent. And this is a topic that's never brought up in Dawa circles, barely, and that is that he gave the statistic that 75% of converts to Islam end up leaving the faith. Now, I don't agree with his explanation whatsoever, because his explanation was, Muslim, like white people, they see Islam as like this exotic non-white religion, and he pointed to Jake wearing the jalabia, and he said once they actually start studying Islam and they say, oh, it's about slavery and war and death and all these things, then that's when they leave. I don't think that's true. I think you do get some people who are like that, who on the surface level, they'll go on Jihad Watch or some other anti-Islam website, read these things, and then get freaked out and then not want to be a part of it anymore. But, I think the best remedy to that is, us as Muslims having a good understanding of these, like I said, these controversial issues. There's probably new Muslims who saw this interview for the first time and think to themselves, wow, we can just enslave anybody, which is not the case. So I think that the reasons why converts end up leaving Islam at such a high rate, I think a lot of it is social and cultural. It's not religious. I think you have Muslim populations in the West that are mostly from a completely different cultural background. They're incredibly busy to begin with on their own. They're running these mosques on shoestring budgets, and they don't have the time, the money, the wherewithal, or the resources to take in most people who convert to Islam and supplant the family loss and community loss that they're going to experience. I think the other 25% of converts that do, make it through that, they've already, they have the community support, or their shahada, or their family relations are unaffected by their shahada. Either their family was supportive, or their family is simply not in the picture. But for the most, I think the vast majority of Westerners, like praying 5 times a day and fasting during Ramadan and paying your zakat and going on Hajj, that's enough for a lifetime. When you add on top of that being seen as a cultural traitor, and you're going into a Muslim community that hardly interacts with your own friends and family, doesn't really have any solutions for improving their relationship with your friends and family. And on top of that, like a lot of Muslims aren't doing anything at all. They may not pray or fast. There's you probably know Muslims who are not practicing, but they still identify as Muslim because they come from a Muslim background, right? So there's no bar. For converts, the bar has been set extremely high, and for born Muslims, there is no bar. Like if I were to be like, say, what, I'm gonna go back to being a regular. I'm not gonna pray 5 times a day. I'm not gonna go to Jummah prayer. I'm just gonna live my life, believe in God and Muhammad, peace be upon him. A lot of Muslims would say, Rob has left Islam. Whereas if you're a born Muslim and you do that, you just go back to being a regular Arab or a regular Pakistani. So it doesn't matter. So those are some of the reasons why you have an attrition rate so high. I do think that is a very important issue that Muslim communities need to address, because it's embarrassing. I mean, even if it's not as high as 75%, anything above 10% should be something that should cause us a lot of concern. And just the whole I wanted to bring this up too, because I'm one of the few channels that actually has my ear to the ground in terms of the dissident right, and what they think about this, because the right is divided into two factions now. When I saw this debate and this interview, I just thought to myself, it's very 2003. What I mean by that is that in 2003, you basically had the neoconservatives, and the right was just full of hate towards Islam. They were pro-war. They wanted to get bin Laden, and there was such fervor. And the WN 1.0 and the paleo conservatives, those were ever diminishing voices. They didn't really have any type of presence. Now the game has completely changed. Now you have two factions of the right, basically. They're pretty much even in terms of popularity. You have the anti-Islam right, i.e. Robert Spencer, David Wood, and then you have the dissident right. So for the anti-Islam right, the problem is religious. They see that the West is becoming more Muslim. There are more and more Muslims, whether that's by people being born into a Muslim family or people converting to Islam. They see this as a problem because they think that, next thing once we become 51% of the population, then we're going to just, start killing people willy-nilly, which is absolutely ridiculous. And and that's ridiculous. And also the fact, even the idea of Muslims taking over the Senate and stuff like that. I mean, religious Muslims, if you saw what Jake and Daniel want to do, they don't even want to be in the West. The religious Muslims want to leave the West and they want to go to the East. That's what you're going to be left with, is just basically liberal Muslims. So, I mean, I don't see that happening. I think that, but what I'm trying to get at is that for the dissident right, it's not that the West is becoming more Muslim. It's that white people are going to become, quickly becoming a hated minority in their own homelands. That's their main concern. So the goal as Muslims shouldn't be, just to simply, do a WWE SmackDown on Robert Spencer and game over, we win. Because all that's going to do is unite these two factions. We want these two factions to be as divided as humanly possible. And what the anti-Islam right is doing is actually making it far more difficult, actually making the demographic situation worse for white Westerners. Because you take two converts to Islam, one male, one female, because of Jihad Watch and because of the anti-Islam right, their families have this intense hate for Islam that trumps basically the fear of their culture dying out, right? So that makes it increasingly more difficult for these two converts to actually meet each other and get married, and where you see this cultural synthesis of their own culture within Islam. Like other groups who've converted to Islam en masse in the West, they've been able to do this effectively because there's no political problem with them collectivizing as a group, like Islam and Spanish. They converted en masse, and yes, there are people in the Latino community who hate Muslims, but because they collectivized, they were able to better give dawah to their people, and they were able to see this cultural synthesis within Islam. But in Europe, you don't see that. You don't see, there is no Italian Muslim subcommunity to begin with. And I think that's why Jake, and I can't fault him for this, has basically assimilated into the Moroccan community. So that's what we should be pointing out, is that the anti-Islam right is making it far more difficult for this natural process to take place. And if you have, say, for example, in Slovakia, a Slovakian, indigenous Slovakian Muslim subcommunity of converts who are marrying each other and having kids, even if you had the Muslim community that's of non-European descent, that's as large as the Slovakian Muslim community, that means that Islam in that country has a net neutral effect on the European total fertility rate, and that would interest the dissident right. It would infuriate the anti-Islam right, which is exactly what we want. So so I mean, that's basically it in a nutshell. There's a lot to go over. There's a lot to chew over in this whole 2x2 debate. Like I said, positive things came out of it. I'm not here to, deflate the balloon of Muslims who thought this was like an amazing thing. I obviously PBD, he thought that Jake and Daniel did wonderful. And again, they probably 80 probably had time to take him aside and say, look, all these accusations that Robert and Rachid made, slavery, war, hitting your wife, we actually don't believe these things, and it should be applied in today. And this is part of the culture of the 7th century. So and on a final note, just to sum everything up, I think as a final point, Robert said that in Christianity we believe that these things that occurred back then don't apply now. Actually, in Islam, that's partially true. I mean, we believe in fiqh, we believe in Islamic jurisprudence. We believe that, when Islamic scholars look at the time and the place and the situation of the people, they take all these factors into account. And just to give you a small example, I mean, like Robert said that, the Quran should be applied at all times in all situations, i.e., Muslims can attack non-Muslims in a non-Muslim country, attack the non-believers. When in actuality, you're living in a non-Muslim country. You're a citizen of that country. You basically, when you became a citizen, you are entering into a contract with that country. And Muslims always follow their contracts and covenants. So you have to abide by the laws of those lands. You can't marry a 9-year-old. You can't have, you can't, just attack non-Muslims on the street. So these rules don't apply into the 7th century, right? But the difference is we are not disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are following the Islamic scholarship, who have decided unanimously that, Darul Harb and Darul Islam don't really apply in this situation. We're in a situation where we abide by the laws of the land. We pay our taxes, we follow the rules, and if those rules become too onerous, we're not allowed to practice our faith, and we can make hijrah to a Muslim country. Right, so that's about it. Like, I know I've taken up a lot of time, and trying to squeeze all this into 20, 25 minutes. Yeah, and as a final note, one thing Rachid said, I actually thought Jake should have been wearing a suit, a nice Italian suit, not made of silk, of course. Like, just to show that Islam is for all cultures. But that's his choice. I mean, like, I'm not gonna. The brother has far more Islamic knowledge than I do. I'm just looking at it from a social psychological perspective. Obviously, only Daniel has ever interviewed anyone in the dissident right. The dissident right is largely unknown. And even though I don't think we should ally with them, I do think that we should be cognizant of the fact that there are varying attitudes on Islam in the right, and that they actually despise Robert Spencer and his group as well. So, anything that we can do to point out that Islam is for all cultures, I think we should maximize that. And Eddie, I mean, he wore a suit, and he's Bosnian. So, in any case, I know Daniel blocked me on Twitter, so he's probably not going to watch this video. Jake, brother Jake, assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum to Daniel as well. If you're watching this video, I'm more than welcome and open for dialogue. Again, congrats on doing the interview. I know it's hard being in the hot seat, and you did the best you could given the unfair format that you were forced to deal with. And hopefully, inshallah, we'll be able to address these controversial issues that Robert and Rachid fired off in rapid succession that you didn't get a time to address. So that's it for today. My name is Robert from Islam for Europeans. Please like and subscribe, and leave some comments in the chat. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.